Welcome back to our Crushing Comics Book Club discussing Grant Morrison's Batman. This episode is kind of Grant Morrison's Batman Plus, because we're going to be talking about some material that's not in the Grant Morrison Batman omnibuses, namely the first half of Final Crisis. And I want to define what that is. That is Final Crisis 1 through 3, Superman Beyond 1 and 2, and optionally, although you do not have to read these, Requiem, Secret Files, and DC Universe Last Will and Testament. Honestly, you don't have to read any of it, because the whole reason we are here is to guide you through it, whether or not you've decided to depart from the omnibus and read this material. So just note that this discussion does not include any Batman issues or any material that's actually in the Morrison omnibuses. A vague disclaimer is no one's friend. So we want to be really, really specific here. And of course, we're going to fully spoil Final Crisis. In order to talk thoroughly about the first half, I think we're probably going to mention some things in the second half. So you can assume that full Final Crisis spoilers are in effect. But as always, we're going to try to not spoil ahead in this Batman run. So we're try not to say anything that goes after Batman 682 and 683. And before we get into it, I want to say, of course, we're going to spoil all of Final Crisis. That's objectively what we're here to do. But I also want to give you a quick list of 3 things that we're going to try to do, that we cannot do, and that we're going to attempt to do. And I've already reviewed this with Harry and Freya, so we're all co-signed on this, right, y'all?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What this discussion
is just as confusing as Final Crisis.
Yeah, it comes with its own continuity.
Just kidding.
What this discussion is going to try to not be about is about us loving or hating Final Crisis. I don't think that's why you tuned in at the end. Maybe we can say, like, I liked it, I didn't, I adore it, that's fine. But that's not what we're here to primarily talk about today. What this discussion cannot be is an infinitely deep dissection of every notable element, reference, and influence in Final Crisis. There's huge blogs, entire books out there about that. We're not going to try to do that all in a single episode. What we're attempting to be is an aid for you. An aid, on one hand, in deciding if you're even going to read Final Crisis, because it's not in the Batman omnibuses. You might just decide to skip it, which we will try to support you in that decision. But also, you might decide to read it, and maybe you don't know how to interpret some parts of it and how to connect it to Morrison's run as a whole. And that's the thing we're really going to attempt to do here, is connect Final Crisis to the themes of Batman and just make sure that it's understood as a story without getting into that full depth of every single influence. Now, Harry, you are our Final Crisis expert here. You're our guide through this jungle. Is there anything you would add to that before we get started?
Just that the idea of being an expert is relative depending on the works. I have read this a lot. It's an incredibly confusing, disorienting book. I do think there are through lines you can understand, and I think there are just strong thematic points and there's an intent that Morrison is putting into it that definitely, I believe, plays out throughout his Batman run going forward. Now, from a terms of plots, it is not as integral as other things, but I truly believe that if you enjoy reading Final Crisis, which is a big ask in and of itself, you can get more from the Batman run. That's been my experience. Other people have different ones. It's an incredibly divisive comic, so that's totally fine.
Okay, and one more note, Grant Morrison has recently shared that their pronouns are they and them, and you will hear us occasionally make a mistake on that, and we're going to quickly correct ourselves and move forward. When you get somebody's pronouns wrong or you misgender them, the best thing you can do is correct yourself and form a good habit of getting their pronouns and gender right in the long term. Of course, if you've caused offense, apologize, but since we're speaking to you and not to Grant Morrison, we're just going to do the best to always improve and be better. I think a good place to start here is to acknowledge Final Crisis is confusing. It's disorienting. It's fine if you have decided to read it, and as you're reading it, you're like, what the hell? I think that is a totally normal feeling and emotion. I don't know, Harry, would you say yes?
That is literally my experience the first time I read it. It was, I started reading comics in the summer of 2008. Secret Invasion and Final Crisis were 2 of the first issues I ever bought in a comic shop.
Wow.
And I flipped through Final Crisis
Trial
and said,
by fire.
I have no idea what's happening. So after a lot of Jeff Johns Green Lantern comics, which are a lot more accessible, I circled back and I kind of understood it more through repetition. One can make the argument that, a book shouldn't have to have this much rereading to kind of
Yes.
get a handle on it. Totally
Yes.
fair. But it is a messy, disorienting book that has through lines I really enjoy and I think are really strong for this run of Batman. So I'm excited to get into them. On reread, there's definitely stuff that has not aged well that I'm just like, oh, okay, that's a problem. I'm sure we might talk about that too. But I cannot help but be super fond of this super odd crossover event comic that is basically serving no master very well besides Grant Morrison's preferred oddities. That's why I like it, but that's not the point of this.
Well, what I want to do is I really think of the first issue of Final Crisis as sort of a Rosetta Stone that has a lot of the conceptual stuff from the DC universe that you need as a baseline to even partially follow what's going on in the rest of Final Crisis. And I honestly did not. Like, I had to phone a friend, I had to use Wikipedia, I had to call Harry. So I want to kind of go through Final Crisis 1, not so much to talk about the plot, but to make sure we've kind of set up all of the continuity players in this show. It opens on Metron bestowing knowledge onto man and then the subsequent violence of man. Metron's, you could view him as the snake here, offering knowledge, cursed knowledge of the apple. You could view him as Prometheus, literally bringing fire to people as he's doing here. Harry, what do we need to know about Metron to understand this story at all? Like, who is he? What is the context of Metron?
So I've read, a lot of DC comics, and I've read a few New Gods with Metron. He's always been positioned as this, new god who is situated in his chair. He is the source of all knowledge. He is this removed from conflict, just higher than thou being. And Morrison's used him in the past in different ways in his Justice League book and others. And, kind of here, it's just kind of showing, he is this eternal force that is kickstarting this massive growth of civilization, and who knows what directions that's going to take. But it's really just kind of contrasting, this young kind of cave person with this, eons beyond us kind of figure, and just showing the levels of the scale of the characters that we are going to see in this comic. It's already starting with the New Gods from page 1, interacting with these base forms of humanity. And that's where a lot of the fun of this the tension of this book comes from, seeing how one affects the other.
And you'd be forgiven in even forgetting this scene, because Metron doesn't really recur as a character or a device until relatively late. But then when he does recur, it's kind of in a really important way. Freya, have you ever read any comics with Metron before?
I don't know. I don't think so. I know. No, I think I read the Mr. Miracle, unless he showed up there.
How much New Gods have y'all read?
I have not read any New Gods, and the only experience
if New Gods, like, there's no new. That's one of the things. Like, there's no new version of New Gods, is there? I mean, there was just everything that Jack Kirby done, right? That's it.
There's the Mr. Miracle book, and I'm sure they've done other stuff, but nothing that's like caught fire that I can think of, really. Not to make a joke about the book, but
okay.
They do get brought back and refreshed, but they're generally the same characters from the Kirby characters, I think, especially at this point in continuity, because it's still before Flashpoint, so they're mostly being treated as they've always been treated.
Yeah, so you have to understand that I only read any comics that are written before 2000 under duress from Peter. So if Peter didn't make me read New Gods, I haven't read New Gods.
No, I don't want to linger too long on Metron.
I do know the character.
I don't want to linger too long on him, but because I have read New 52 Justice League, I want to put out something to make sure I'm not misunderstanding. My knowledge is that Metron and the chair are somewhat separate, and that the chair has special properties of knowledge and sight on its own. So it's coveted if you can get his ass off the seat. Does that hold true here? Because that will change our interpretation of the back half.
I'm sorry, up front, that's one of the biggest things of Metron I've read. I don't know if that clashes with pre-Nifty 2 material. But you know what? That just means that it doesn't really matter. If Harry didn't need to know, and he can still understand Final Crisis, it doesn't matter. Okay. So then the next scene in Final Crisis #1 introduces the murder mystery here, which is kind of the mystery of the whole story, but it's kind of a red herring. It almost feels like Morrison kind of being like, identity crisis. Yeah, I read it. Because they find Orion shot dead in an alleyway, basically.
but maybe shot. They can't tell. There's no bullet to be discovered at first. So Orion, I kind of know this answer, but can someone explain who Orion is?
So Orion is the son of Darkseid that was traded to the new gods, new Genesis, what have you, with the Allfather. And in his return, Allfather gave his son to Darkseid, who is scot-free, Mr. Miracle. So it's kind of like the son of the devil raised in heaven, the son of God raised in hell. That's always been my interpretation of those two characters.
And they kind of vacillate with the nature-nurture aspect of it, because, of course, Scott-Free is generally a good guy. And Orion, being raised in heaven, quote-unquote, you would think would be a good guy, but sometimes they play with, like, but he's still Darkseid's son. And we're not here to legislate that. You just need to know who he is in a vast general sense.
Incredibly formidable, incredibly almost militaristic, like, powerful new god. So the fact that he is dead is, a big deal. And it's just... this book again is just still dealing with the contrast of like a very simple kind of like noir detective character in Turpin seeing this fallen, god or a dead angel, whatever you want to call it, and just showing the scale that we're going to be operating with here.
Yeah, it strikes me that Morrison is setting up like a very typical DC mid-2000s event, but they're setting it up in such a way that it's almost like more fantastical than anything. It's about a dead god. It's not just about somebody's husband or wife that's been murdered.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of build up to this book with things that happened in their Seven Soldiers collection of miniseries. There's been didn't know you read that, Freya.
Oh, please. Like, I'm still sleeping from that. Like,
we should have talked about that earlier. That could have been a lead-in. And then, there was a Countdown to Final Crisis miniseries that, frankly, I haven't read. I always heard it actually contradicted Morrison's story, so who knows? It's kind of funny where I've actually read this book several times, kind of from the get-go here, just knowing there was a battle in heaven, the bad guys won, and now humanity, Earth, has to deal with the consequences of that.
Well, that's nice. So that's a nice general understanding we can move forward with. So now I want to put one to Freya, because I'm pretty sure she knows the answer to this. Can you just briefly let us know who is this Question, if people have never encountered the Question before, because she's been yet to be in the Batman run? Who is this?
So this Question is Renee Montoya, and I don't necessarily know how she got the Question. I think because it happened in the 52 run, like not the new 52, but the 52 run, like when all the heroes left and everything. So original Question was Vic Shays, and he was like a cutthroat, like, I'm going to get to the bottom of this, which kind of worked back in the day. It was written by Denny O'Neil, who we kind of did some of his work over here. It worked back in the day, but now he comes up straight up as a Fox News reporter. So there's that. He does not come up very well these days. Or you can, so I think at some point the mantle change, and then Renee Montoya, you can see more of her in Ed Brubaker and Greg Rucka's Gotham Central.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I've read.
Now she is the one doing, carrying on, which kind of you have to kind of ask, it's like, okay, what is Question? Right.
Here's the thing I wasn't sure. Does it come with special powers, or do you just get the mask that anonymizes your face?
So the mask kind of comes, mask kind of comes from he has a Q-type character. I'm forgetting his name, which is like his Alfred. He kind of fixes it up, and then he wears it so that nobody knows who he is. Okay. How he's coming up with the answers and questions questions like that. So yeah, and so at one point Renee took over that. So I was kind of excited to see that, because I was like, oh yeah, there's her, and Renee Montoya later goes on to become girlfriend of Batwoman.
That's right, and we've talked about that on this channel before.
Right, also, but it's not the same one though. It doesn't feel like the same woman. You know what I mean? Because it was New 52 and all of that.
Well,
feel
they
like
do
it's-
start being together pre-New 52, and Greg Rucka's run, but you can see Freya and I talking about that here already, so we're not going to go back to that.
Right,
and now I want to pitch. I want to explain one thing, because it's one thing I know, because my name on the internet is Crisis, and I'm supposed to know this. DZ, when they originally did Crisis back in the day, if there was a tie-in that wasn't really a tie-in, but they wanted to market it under the Crisis line, they just put red skies in the book to be like, ooh, the Crisis is happening off screen somewhere. And so red skies in a comic book, but specifically in a DC comic book, indicates that there's a crisis happening. And so they're using that here, Morrison and J.G. Jones, to specifically indicate that there's this portentous crisis level event happening, and like nobody's kind of onto it yet. And the other secret piece of information I'll disclose is, as somebody who read a lot of DC before talking about DC with anybody, it's Dark Side, even though you might think that it's pronounced Dark Seed, as I still pronounce it in my head to this day. So if somebody says go to the Dark Side Club to check out the mystery, that's a double entendre, folks. Okay, so the final thing that we need to talk about here, and I'm going to turn it over to either of you because I don't know a damn thing about it, is can you briefly, in an understandable way, explain what a monitor is in the scope of the DC universe?
Oh, no idea.
So, and saying as someone who has not read Crisis on Infinite Earths for at least 6 years and Infinite Crisis for a while longer, the monitors are the beings that rest above the multiverse, the DC universe as we know, and all the variations, and basically monitor them to make sure they're working or dealing with any kind of issues. They're very clearly kind of like lacking personalities to an extent, and kind of just these fixtures. Although this story is basically positing that all of their interactions has started to kind of chafe on them and change who they are in a way, which I'm excited to get into. But they're just a bunch of space nerds that look at all of the universes in the orrery, which is the big tube of the universes.
I mean, if I can just be like my basic Marvel fan self, they're basically just the Watchers, but the multiverse. They're not really supposed to intercede unless time is getting super screwed up. But they're supposed to kind of just like shepherd the Earth. Is that a good enough understanding to use for this?
That's totally right. Yeah.
And their impartiality is actually really important, because here's the first actual plot point now that we've kind of laid the foundation here. One of them, his Earth gets destroyed, and he's feeling some kind of way about it. And so they basically curse him to be on our prime Earth and just be a regular person, but they can't like totally suppress his monitorness. So he's on our Earth trying to just be a normal human, but he's almost got this kind of like Gwenpool, Morrison Animal Man extrasensory sense where he's like, I am noticing there's cosmic shit happening, even though I'm trying to work at this burger joint and just be a normal person, because he doesn't fully understand that he was a monitor and he's been cursed to be on this Earth.
And what I love is that what this is kind of
oh my God.
I
honest to God, that was Renee Montoya.
No, it was a man.
Wrong. How is that a man?
It's just there's a female monitor when they're kind of giving it the sentencing.
Oh, she does maybe kind of look like Renee Montoya. I'll give you that.
She does.
No, because the one that is working in the burger joint, I thought that her brain was washed. She somehow got brainwashed as well, and currently in a burger joint.
Oh,
no, that's a monitor.
No. Okay, well,
that's a monitor come to Earth. So what's cool
let it all out,
though,
Freya. Let it out.
No, I mean, hold on. No, come on. Okay,
please,
hold on.
please.
Because who is who? Like, so who is
nobody
that
else in the
Because
burger joint mattered except for the guy who used to be the monitor,
whose name is in monitor world is like Nix Uotin, which is like a real space name.
No, but the thing is there was one character who was like constantly like, was saying nonsense, and then she got fired.
Same person that got fired. It's a guy.
It's a guy?
Yes.
It's a guy.
How is
he has a weird he just has like not a lot of hair. But his name, so the thing that's cool about this.
So I honestly thought that something went wrong because Renee was in the same proximity as the other guy who was taken, and I thought that she got zapped as well and she can't remember. Okay, now that makes more sense. Okay. Never
All
mind.
right.
Whatever.
Now we're talking. That's also the next issue, by the way, when he's at the burger joint.
Yeah, we're kind
But,
of in 1 and 2
sure.
at this point.
Well, what's just real quick, it's kind of establishing, like, the monitors basically, through observing, through interacting, what have you, they've kind of had like a narrative set upon them and then be absorbed into through the even the measure of like having names and having almost personalities now, where you have Nick Swoots and you have Ouija Dell. And that's kind of a big theme of this book, of how just these narrative structures start to chafe and kind of bleed into all of these timeless characters, and also characters on Earth, which is kind of a big thing we'll be leading up to.
All right, so basically this sets into motion a couple different things. Now, the one we haven't talked about yet from the first issue here, which becomes very important, so Harry, try not to spoil the second half too hard, is this surly detective who we meet talking to Renee Montoya as the question. His name is Turpin?
Yeah.
And
Dan
he's
Turpin.
on the case of some missing kids, which actually just is one little thread that gets pulled, and he winds up becoming very central to this. Should we know who he is, or is it fine to just know that he's this overweight, surly detective?
I mean, I think not the beauty, but like, I have no idea who he is. He's just Dan Turpin. He's like a hard-boiled noir detective, and some stuff happens to him, and it almost works better that like you don't know who he is, and he's just an everyday kind of guy. And he's filling that archetype, which kind of gets put into conflict with other archetypes. So I honestly, I really haven't read anything with him before this book. I feel like he's fairly obscure. YouTube commenters yell if you disagree. And,
but I do think I thought maybe he was being used for that one Gotham detective Harvey Bullock, that like maybe Morrison wanted to use Harvey Bullock for this, and DC was like, no, you can't put him through all this, and so Morrison's like, well, I'll just make a Harvey Bullock analog, but I can't substantiate that. That was just how it is.
Also, a missed opportunity not to use Bradley. Like, the first detective.
Oh, Slam Bradley. Yeah.
Yeah, Slam Bradley. I'm like, don't you already have a character like that? Why aren't we using that?
Well, because of what happens to him. So basically this sets off a chain of events where a lot of things start happening, and the superheroes in the League all are getting really involved in investigating the murder of Orion, which is a big deal. But at the same time, a supervillain named Libra is basically going to the secret society of villains and being like, I got your heroes taken care of. And as a sign of this, he's chosen this super, super boring villain, this minor league villain who really hates Martian Manhunter. He just hates him. And so Libra is basically like, look, I got you, Martian Manhunter, to prove that he's actually a big enough deal to take down all of the heroes that the villains might want. And he wants all the villains to basically align with him or get the hell out. And this has all the big villains, it's got Lex Luthor, it's got every big villain that you'd want generally. And this is kind of important because at the beginning, it feels like it's all going to be separate threads, but it actually turns out to all be the same story later. So Martian Manhunter dies. It's super, super sad. If you want to get more about that plot point from Final Crisis 1, you can read Requiem, which kind of expands it more and gives you a little bit more texture about like Martian Manhunter and who he is. And it makes his death less of this kind of like shock moment that just gets swiped away. Because after he dies, that's pretty much it. Like the story just trucks on, and you would be forgiven and being like, but that's like a major Justice League member. What just happened? You would want to read Requiem if that's the case.
Yeah, that's just one way to cripple them, because it's like every time I feel like there's like the second Justice League arc I read where it's like, oh yeah, we lost Martian Manhunter, now we can't talk to each other.
Gotta take the psychics off the board first.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, get rid of Professor X and Jean Grey first thing in X-Men.
Well, now I want to turn it over to Harry a little bit and talk about some of the things in Final Crisis 2. This opens with a sequence that I cannot make heads or tails of, with some heroes that are in Japan. They're having a fight. One of them's a sumo wrestler. Is there what do I need to understand thematically about this and how it's going to connect later in the story?
Well, yeah. I mean, you haven't heard of the Super Young Team or whatever they're called. You haven't had that yet. No, I mean, they're established. It's a jarring thing. They're just kind of put into this book in this issue, just like, we're rich, we're snotty, we kind of have powers, or we're rich, we have money, and we're kind of both fanboys, but not super beholden to the older generations. I think this is something Morrison does that doesn't work entirely well, but it's kind of revealed that they're kind of imperative in kind of taking the fight to Darkseid later in the book, and almost are they kind of like the next generation reflecting like a new kind of world or what have you. That, you know, I don't have like a full lock around that, but they're adding color. They're definitely interesting.
Yeah, I think it's a mistake
Mm.
to assume that everybody's important in Final Crisis as a character. A
Yeah.
lot, what I'm starting to understand, having been through it a few times now, is sometimes they're just important for how Morrison is using them. And I think Harry nailed it. Like, it truly does not matter who all these characters are. Morrison is setting up a kind of old guard heroes versus new guard heroes and their relative levels of effectiveness, which is reflective of the themes of Batman as Bruce. Is Batman Bruce? Is Batman still effective? And also the mentors and mentees thing that we just read in the Black Glove arc in the murder mystery. So these are all Morrison themes that are being repeated. And that's what we want to do for you in this conversation, to be like, you don't need to get too fussed over the characters, just notice the theme.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because, you know, this is what I come on my reread is like, you know, this is a very just a disorienting book where it will just have this random splash page of characters you've never met before in this big crisis thing. And it's got the format of a event book where it is just showing these random snippets of different worlds or different parts of the world and is showing heroes and villains, but like it's making no efforts to explain any of this. Like most event comics will try to hold your hand. This is just like good luck, sink or swim, and you know, not to judge if you sink.
So I read ridiculous number of events that is good for someone, you know, someo's health. You can't do that. You can
make that case totally. Yeah.
Like you can't, you have to give at least a caption box with like where the location is. And this doesn't even do that.
It would have been better if they had, you know, I'm not going to even pretend to argue against that.
Yeah. So it's just like, okay, sure. Like, do you want us to care about what you wrote or not?
Well, I think, and again, I said, you know, this is not going to be about whether it's good or bad, but I think there's a good part to like break down some thematic things that Morrison's doing and then get back to the plot, which is Morrison's doing this thing where they are almost specifically mocking event books. Which
it feels like that, right?
Right. Like even this whole idea of like, oh, we're giving you slices of plot. They seem important, but guess what? Nobody's going to explain it. It doesn't matter. You've never met any of these characters before. Like it's literally mocking the form. This is what happens when you give Morrison the keys to the kingdom. They've done it once before in DC 1 million and they're back for an encore, right? But as the reader, if you're not in on that joke, it just seems like a poorly planned event. And like, I'm in on the joke. And yet to me also, as I'm reading it, I have that same level of disorientation. I think that this is one of the things that keeps people at a remove from Morrison sometimes is they feel like they've got to be in on their joke in order to get Morrison. And I think part of why we wanted to read Batman is to like demystify that Batman's not one where you have to be on the joke. You can read the Batman run and just really dig it. But I think the danger of reading Final Crisis in the Batman run and why I did not want to read it, let the record show, is that Morrison and Final Crisis breaks that suspension of disbelief, and you've got to be in on their bullshit to understand Final Crisis. And so it's kind of like you can't have it both ways. Either you're doing a really literal read of Batman and Final Crisis is going to wreck it, or you go into Final Crisis and say, okay, I'm going to do all of this bullshit, which kind of takes away for me from the wonder of Batman a little bit.
Sure. We've talked about it. Like, you know, you get as much out of these as you kind of put into it. But
like he's trying to steal our soul, remember?
Yeah.
Or they are trying to steal our soul.
But you're not obligated to put a lot into this. It really shouldn't be on you. Like this book's kind of a mess. I really find all this endearing, but I know that's very specific to me. And like, I figure your issues with this are 2000% valid because
they're real.
They're real problems.
Many people feel this way.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I take personal offense when people are like, "Oh, you have to do the work for understanding a fiction." No shit, I don't. You are the one who's I already paid, and that's where my responsibility ends. It's your job to entertain me. It's
not to stay on this.
No, but it's like I'm sorry. There's other thousands and thousands of people who does this on a regular basis, so I'm not going to give them any credit for this. Like it's like, oh yeah, this is the satire of events. I was supposed to know that. From reading what about this? I'm supposed to know that. Anyway, never mind. Okay.
At the end of the day, like we'll move on. It's just like this oddity of a book is still like infinitely more fun for me to read than like Secret Invasion, which I find like completely empty calories. So like I think
At
there's a
least
case to
I
be made for
understood Secret Invasion.
yeah,
To
but then
hate
you
it
just
properly.
forget it.
I don't even.
Then it just leaves your brain like
but
Well, look, we
immediately.
said we were not going to do the good or bad. We said we weren't,
You're right,
and
you're
that's
right,
not
you're
the
right,
topic
you're
of
right,
this
you're
conversation. It's important thematically, though, because this is the thing that we're talking about. Like, you can either engage with this as the surface level story, which we will give you the tools to do, or you can look at the thematic elements too. Both are valid reads, and it's valid to think it's good and bad at the same time. It's a Schrodinger's story of good and bad. But what happens in Final Crisis 2 that starts to get interesting here is that the Green Lantern Corps kind of asserts their authority, not just anybody in the Green Lantern Corps, but the Alpha Lanterns, the uncorruptible, perfect Lanterns, right? The super cops come to Earth and they're like, step back, Batman. We're going to investigate this murder. You're basic. But it's a problem because you're basic. But we quickly discover that they have been corrupted, which speaks to the whole scale of this. Like the uncorruptible cops have been corrupted. And it goes real south real fast because there's this theme that people have been corrupted, not just with possession, not just with feeling bad, but they've basically been infected with the anti-life equation, which kind of gets teased in the first issue, but I don't feel like you really get it until you see that it's happened with this representative of the Lanterns, Kraken. And so she triggers a couple of bad things to happen, basically. She messes with the investigation of Orion's body, which obstructs justice here. And she basically lures Batman to do some further investigation to get Batman off the board. It's really important, it seems, that the Trinity be taken off the board, maybe because this plot was hatched while they were all away in the wake of Infinite Crisis. I don't know DC continuity that well, but it seems like it's a really big thing to prey upon the weaknesses of Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman, and also Martian Manhunter, to make sure that this whole anti-life thing is possible. And so Batman becomes the first one taken off the board here because he's basically just lured away, and they begin trying to siphon out all of the information he has, but we're going to get to that in the second half. But Harry and Freya, anything else you want to talk about with this kind of anti-life equation and the corruption of the Alpha Lanterns?
Well, the Alpha Lanterns are lame. They got introduced like very shortly before this in Jeff Johns' run. It was a bummer arc then. I'm fairly certain that only happened to tee up Final Crisis. I don't think it's great here, but like I do love the Batman moment of him realizing that this Alpha Lanter's bad news because of the ring print in her hand by Jon Stewart punching her with his lantern ring, and him that's like a good like on the moment detective moment for Batman. I felt that was like you get a lot of personality of their Batman in this quick snippet of story, which is like sometimes the best an event comic can do, which isn't saying a ton, but like it's just like a fun scene. And it's like an Alpha Lantern possessed by or infected with granny goodness, which is just a really cool conceit that I like.
Right, because that confused me a little bit, that some of these people are just being affected with the anti-life equation.
Yes.
But then some of them are being infected with it so that specific people from Apocalypse can pilot their bodies. But that's not the case for every single one.
No, they're hiding in bodies. Darkseid is in the club owner. Granny Goodness is in this Kraken character. Later on, Calabac, Darkseid's son, is put into a tiger creature that's got some connection to Captain Marvel. And they don't really give you any visual indicator this is happening.
Because I was super confused.
Yeah. It's just through dialogue, and it's super. And Morrison, I like this. This one I don't even care. I do really like how disorienting and just kind of like off kilter their dialogue is sometimes. But when things like this are happening, like another layer of like infections and double appearances for characters, that you might not even know because they're kind of obscure, like, good luck. But I do enjoy that a lot. I love the idea of just these evil gods hiding out in mortal forms.
Well, here's the plot beat that carries us from 2 to 3. Batman and the Flashes are kind of arriving at an interesting conclusion here. Of course, we'll get to that, which is imagine a bullet fired backwards through time. So if you fire it from the future, it passes through somebody in the present and kills them, but then it continues traveling backwards. So there's no evidence. It's kind of, like the classic detective trope of like, it was a bullet made of ice and then it melted. This is the Grant Morrison version of the bullet made of ice. It's a bullet that shoots through time. So Batman's off the board, but luckily there's somebody else who knows a lot about crime scene investigation who is back on the board, which is Barry Allen, who had been dead and gone for a while. And Morrison, in what had to have been a pretty big moment at the time, if you're reading comics, has 2 other Flashes is investigating the crime scene. And out through time comes plummeting Barry Allen, and he's like, you got to come with me. Like it's the bullet through time. Everything's going to be messed up, and the black racer is on my tail. And the black racer is a Flash and Speed Force concept, but it also can be more generally said to represent death. And it's kind of the idea of like, if, you know, the bullet traveled through time, you know, killing people, and then the black racer is following, kind of reaping. Harry, is that a decent summary? Is there anything we have to add to that?
No, that is a great way to put it. I do believe I was under the impression the Black Racer is more of a New Gods construction beyond being.
Oh, see, Flash, I know it from New 52 because they used it. Or maybe even Rebirth, because they use it as a Flash thing, but maybe it is New Gods. I would have no way to know that.
A random Wikipedia search is saying Black Racer is created by Jack Kirby, first appearing in New Gods #3. So I've always viewed that as a New Gods fixture. But yeah, that's basically it. I'm not gonna lie to you, I don't fully understand the plot of the bullet firing backward through times. I get the gist, I'm pretty sure. But but that was a huge moment because this was the first time beyond, I think, in the end of Jeff Johns' Flash run, that Barry Allen returns. And this was kind of the start, because shortly after this, he kind of becomes part of Flash Rebirth and all that stuff. So it was just like, it's just a cool Grant Morrison idea of a bullet backwards through time, killing a New God, and Barry Allen racing with the Grim Reaper behind him. Comics are fun, and I like saying these sentences out loud.
Now we roll into Final Crisis 3, and then also the stuff that comes with it. So basically, there's three separate things happening here that are starting to come together. One is this murder investigation, which has been semi-thwarted because they have figured out that this Alpha Lantern's infected. So that's like one line of attack, right? The second line of attack is just the spread of the anti-life equation. And by the end of Final Crisis 3, it's kind of reached critical mass where it's been spread to enough individual agents that have kind of set up the bad stuff that's going to happen. But now they're basically just doing a reply all email to everybody on Earth to infect everybody. And we all know how those reply alls get out of control. And this is like a reply all to 7 billion people, effectively, to every electronic device, television, email, server, screen in the world, right? But then the third thing that is a part of this is that they still have to take Wonder Woman and Superman off the board because they're probably the people who would easily solve this. Libra gets involved with Superman partially to show Lex that he means business and bombs the Daily Planet because he knows the best way to take care of Superman is to take care of Lois. And he severely, severely hurts Lois and she's near death, which immediately takes Superman off the board. And then Wonder Woman gets tempted to visit Bloodhaven, I think ostensibly to look at where Batman got off to, but maybe I'm misremembering that. And Wonder Woman herself gets corrupted by a number of Furies and given the anti-life equation herself, effectively becoming a Fury. So now they've gotten all three of the Trinity off the table and they're ready to hit reply all. And that's pretty much what's happening in Final Crisis 3. The reason they want to, there's not a whole lot else to talk about. The thing that there's to talk about, and this is where I'm going to wholesale turn it over to Harry, is Superman Beyond 1 and 2, which are by Grant Morrison. I'm pretty smart, y'all. Maybe not as smart as Freya, but I've read as many comics as Freya, but I'm pretty smart. And when I tell you, I could not tell you a single thing that happened in these two comic books. I could have been looking at a beige wall for 50 minutes for the amount that I got out of them. And I messaged Harry late tonight to be like, Harry, what the is happening? And so what I know and what I understand is that Superman has the SADS because his lady's dying. And somebody comes to him in the hospital to say, I will cure your SADS by giving you this magic MacGuffin, but you have to come with me. It's only going to take a second in Earth time, but it's going to be a wondrous adventure. And then I blacked out. So Harry is going to explain why Superman Beyond 1 and 2 are important. I'm not passing a value judgment. I'm just saying it was a beige wall and then I blacked out. And Harry is going to try to help me recover this time that I lost.
Okay.
So
first Freya is going to chime in.
No, this is also going to be the first part. I mean, I know that you said that we're not going to talk about whether it's good or bad or any of that, but this is the time to say that this is when I stopped reading altogether. And
totally get it. I totally
wanted to. I was cursing Harry's name.
After Final Crisis 3, I'm like, this is not for me. I'm not going to waste time, and I'm not going to. So from now going forward until we talk about Batman, I'm just gonna be like, okay. So Harry, go ahead.
Okay. So Superman Beyond 1 and 2 is, to me, one of my favorite Superman stories because I think it is a really great 2-issue showcase of why this character is beautiful. There are countless lovely little dialogue exchanges. There's a sense of idealism and the idea that this idealism of this character is so intrinsically powerful and singular that it it transcends the reality in which he's situated. But from a plot standpoint, basically, a monitor named Zilovala, I believe is her name, goes to him saying, we can find a bit of the bleed energy that kind of connects universes to bring your wife back from the dead, or when she's about to die. So he teams up with a series of alternate Supermans across the multiverse, riding on this crazy, like, yellow submarine kind of spaceship called the Ultima Thule.
That's the perfect description.
No, that's absolutely what it is. That's definitely Yellow Submarine vibes.
Mm-hmm.
And so he teams up with Captain Marvel, Billy Batson. He has a Dr. Manhattan kind of Superman. He also teams up with Ultraman, who is his evil counterpart from Earth 2, which was handled all in the Earth 2 book from like early 2000s, late 90s. I don't know. But basically that book is really positing that the monitors, just by continuously interacting with the DC universe, have become part of this greater story. This is
right. It's like an observation effect thing, right? If after you told me about it, I kind of went back. It's to say, like, nobody can really be apart from the story. As soon as you observe the story, and especially as the monitors or much like Watchers, and we know this from the Watcher as people who understand Marvel maybe a little bit better than DC, is there's always an observer effect. He's always having an effect of the story by observing the story.
And they discover this in this land of nowhere, which is beyond the multiverse. It's beyond conflict. It's just completely stagnant and inert. And just being there, you start to fade away because there's nothing to even keep you there, really. Anyway, so Billy Batson and Captain Marvel and Superman basically discovered the book that contains an infinite number of pages. It's like the ultimate book. And they discover the secret origin of the monitors and the DC universe, which is basically the original monitor discovers a flaw in the void of white, and it's just this bleed energy that is showing basically comics. It's showing the DC universe. It's showing interactions, and this leaves a mark on this original monitor, and it's in the shape of a superhero, just a cape and superhero. And it's basically showing that this is Superman, just showing that this figure is so special with all of these comics that this is something like, this is the ultimate hero structure figure. Now, I'm a sucker for all this Morrison stuff. I think it's great. I really enjoy all this. And it's basically showing that throughout the story that the big theme of this is that the nature of these stories and the storytelling, Final Crisis really is a story about stories, all that stuff. And like, just by interacting with, the observer effect, as we spoke about, these characters are impacted and absorbed into and reflected to these greater, larger than life themes and energies and fixtures. So basically,
but it's like Morrison's basically making textual here the idea that characters are archetypal. This whole idea that there's this yellow submarine like arc going through between multidimensional space, and the characters that they place on the arc, the good Superman, bad Superman, this kind of like innocent but experienced Shazam, they're all archetypes. It's basically just being like, all you do in these events is move around these archetypes like chess pieces, and I'm showing what happens when the archetypes kind of break out of the story, which is they're Animal Man, even though it's not as much of a self-insert as Animal Man, where like Morrison's literally on the page. It's kind of that. And then once you understand that that's what it's about, again, just like the event is not really an event, it's a commentary on events. This is not really a story, it's a comment on Superman's stories. And once Harry opened that up for me, I was like, oh, because I was trying to read it totally literally, and it did not make any sense to me at all.
And you've mentioned, there being craft issues with this. I have no disagreements with that, but like the themes which it's addressing are so potent and interesting to me, then this is also a reflection of the actual conflict happening in the actual universe with Final Crisis, of literally these gods, the evil gods, are breaking reality around them. That is the weight that these characters have. And basically in Superman Beyond, something similar happens where they have to ascend. Superman has to, this is my read, Superman has to ascend to the monitor's plane and kind of infuse with this superstructure to fight the original monitor, because it's revealed that the monitors basically take these stories, take the 52 worlds, they put them in the orrery, and they basically feed on them. It's revealed that these monitor creatures are literal vampires that feed off story energy and are less neutral, made more of a problem than everyone thought, which kind of plays into the end of Final Crisis. But like, And I'm sure that's some kind of commentary on DC
Yeah,
Comics.
I think it's some
readers.
commentary on readers. I'm like, just at me next time, Morrison. I am a vampire who feeds on story
and
energy.
he touches on some of this in Multiversity later on, but that's a whole other bag of worms.
Yes.
So I mean, basically, it's just the ultimate fight, the ultimate conflict. Superman wins. He fights Mandrak, who is revealed to be this first Monitor turned into a vampire evil creature that is beyond any other story or conflict. This is very important because you kind of need to read it to understand the ending of Final Crisis. I cannot imagine what people felt if they didn't read Superman Beyond, just reading the main trade. But I think this is all great. And it even ends with, like, the ending is, Superman wins, he gets the bleed, whatever happened, he gives Lois a kiss, brings her back. This is such like a classic, like archetypal story ending, which is so in line with what Morrison's been trying to say throughout these two issues. And then the final page is the tombstone saying "to be continued," because as with every story, they're never truly over, especially in serialized comics. That is how I read Final Beyond. Yeah.
So for those of us who were not impressed by Superman Beyond, even Harry's wonderful explanation, I would like to propose 3 other books who have done it very, very well and didn't necessarily need to know all of this. One is Sandman by Neil Gaiman.
Story about
Kieran
stories.
Kieran Gillen, Journey into Mystery.
Story about stories.
And Al Ewing, Loki, Agent of Asgard, did the exact same plot. So much better, and didn't need to know.
This one has Superman and Superman.
Yeah, right. Sure.
Well, I think here's what's interesting about that, and then we'll wrap up this first half discussion. Is that Sandman and Loki, by their very natures, are characters who are about the nature of stories and the nature of truth and lies. And so when you tell a story like that with them, it's almost like inherent in understanding them as a character that's what you're getting. And I think what Morrison is doing is they are using Superman to say, like, well, anybody this virtuous is effectively an archetype that we're using to kind of act as a force in stories. Thus, he is a character that is about stories. But it's like, it almost feels grafted. It's like it's taking a character that many of us are using in a different, more iconic way and saying, this character is also a story about stories. And so it really like grinds. Because after reading about all this, I can go back and understand a lot of Superman Beyond, but it still doesn't like click for me the way if even that same exact story was told with Loki, which it almost beat for beat has been on many occasions. And I think that's just because of in my head, the discordant note of like trying to make Superman this metatextual character. For me, I just can't get there. And it's partially me problem, partially a story problem. But I think that a lot of people probably encounter that problem.
I think that the grease that kind of gets that going better is A, just being a massive Superman fan, B, being a massive Morrison fan. I'm willing to excuse a lot of the bullshit. And 3, but like I feel like this book successfully posits like Superman as a primal, just integral structural story that can even like transcend the boundaries and narrative restraints in this universe. This is all very, but to get you there, I do think you just have to really love Superman. But I think this book is full of great little interactions, just Superman talking with Captain Billy Batson, and just like, inspiring Merryman, this like boring substitute teacher looking kind of human, to like kind of raise up and fight too. And he says, like, you can be a hero anywhere. It's just showing that like the literal existence of Superman will even change nowhere where they are, because that's the kind of power that we're dealing with. I think there's some really lovely character beats and just like emotion in this beyond the crazy trippy stuff.
Well, we're going to use that to put a pin in the first half of Final Crisis. So we're on a big cliffhanger. The world was sent a really, really large reply all email that contained the anti-life equation. And Superman, although who knows how he would stop that, is nowhere to be found because he is off adventuring through liminal between story space. And that is where we will start our second half of this Final Crisis discussion. I want to thank you so much for being part of what is absolutely an unusual episode. We completely appreciate that. We really wanted to try to tread the line between kind of like helping you understand it, and also if you've decided not to read it, that's cool too. We can still inform you about all of the themes of it, and that's what we're going to continue to do in next episode, although with the added bonus of actually getting to talk about 2 Batman issues in the next episode.
And please include, if you feel like we misinterpreted something, there's some detail we forgot, leave it in the comments, because there's so much stuff in this that we'd love to kind of get more perspective on it.
Yeah, we're not even attempting to try to talk about everything in Final Crisis. We're attempting to talk about the key components of it that you probably need the most to understand it to the minimum amount. But until next time, we can't even give our Why We Read Batman sign off because there was barely any Batman in this. So we're just going to say thank you so much. And on behalf of Freya and Harry and myself, we will see you next time for more Batman by Grant Morrison here on Crushing Comics. And we hope that you are well.